Hi there. This is Mike Jude. I'm with IDC, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about navigating the endpoint protection and endpoint detection and response market. Some of the things we'll cover are some of the trends impacting the market, the impact of mobility, and because we're IDC and we can't help ourselves, we'll make some strategic recommendations. I'd like to preface this talk by saying that once upon a time, I was trained to be a public policy witness, and our trainer said that you should always think of your presentation as a train with an engine, a bunch of boxcars, and a caboose. And the caboose is the thing that you really want to leave with people. So that's basically where we're going to start. Uh, but starting with the engine, why should you listen to me? Well, my background goes way back before TCP/IP, IBM's SNA networking, where endpoint security was really easy. If you didn't trust a particular endpoint device, you simply turned it off, and you did that from the data center. Now things are a lot more complex, and um, as a consequence, uh, the endpoint has become a very complex space with a lot of different considerations, and it's become a strategically important thing to pay attention to if you're working in cybersecurity. So what's the caboose? We'll start with the caboose and then we'll reprise that at the end. But basically, the endpoint protection market is evolving very rapidly in response to new technologies, new threats, new ways of working. And decision makers must adapt to this to a new strategic approach focusing on integration, AI capabilities, mobile security, I say here comprehensive protection, and business continuity. And we won't dwell on it, but business continuity is becoming a big deal across the cybersecurity spectrum. It's no longer enough to say we're protecting the business. We now need to say, how are we improving the business? How are we furthering the business objectives? Because if the business isn't making money, they're not investing in cybersecurity. So, what is endpoint security? Well, endpoint security traditionally has been uh, dealing with endpoint devices. Those are things like desktop computers, servers that connect to the network, uh, basically the IT infrastructure that meets the user where they work. And as long as it was defined that way, it was pretty straightforward. It was pretty simple. The device was either connected or it wasn't. But now the threat has become so acute that we can no longer consider the endpoint as simply a particular device connected to the network. It's now essentially everything that connects to the IT infrastructure of a business. And so that includes things as diverse as your desktop machine, a laptop you carry with you, um, uh, your cell phone in some cases, and tablets. So increasingly, the ecosystem of the endpoint is all those things that can connect to the network that can potentially expose business data to intrusion or compromise. And increasingly, the endpoint is also integrating into higher level tools such as endpoint detection and response. And as EDR becomes a thing that enables other capabilities within the cybersecurity suite, increasingly we're looking at things like XDR, extended detection and response, which I admit is a term that's being overused. Uh, but the notion is that we have many sources of telemetry, and endpoint is a very important part of that telemetric uh, ecosystem, if you will, that the sources of information that allow us to detect and respond to threats within the computing infrastructure. So that brings us to navigating the endpoint protection and EDR market. And as I indicated before, the endpoint protection market's evolving very rapidly. It's being driven by technological advances like artificial intelligence. It's being driven by trends in mobility. It's one of the things that COVID did for us was it basically institutionalized the notion of remote work and mobile work. We all carry around devices in our pockets that basically allow us to do pretty much everything, maybe not as easily, but basically everything that we would do on a laptop machine. Um, Decision makers must adapt to a strategic approach, focusing on integration, AI, mobility, and by aligning the endpoint security investments and organizational goals, business can enhance resilience while optimizing operational efficiency. And the reason I read that verbatim is that it's pretty important. No longer can we think of cybersecurity as a vertical unto itself. It's now part of the business, and increasingly, we obtain budget by making that case. So let's do a brief overview of the endpoint protection EDR market. In case you're wondering, the endpoint protection market is a thing. We're showing double-digit growth. IDC projects a CAGR of about 11% through 2029, with nearly $25 billion globally. That's a substantial market, and that's a substantially growing market. And we'll take a little bit of an examination of the growth and how that maps out in just a second, but also vendor dynamics. We are noting that key players, there are key players that dominate the market, but increasingly, there are new entrants to the market that are bringing new innovation, new approaches to cybersecurity, and are essentially driving the innovation curve substantially, which is one of the reasons why we think that the growth in the future is going to be substantial. Vendor advantages. This is a great one because there are many ways to approach the market if you're a vendor. One simple way is simply to modify the way you charge for your services. And so we see a lot of that where some of the principal players are exploring different ways of licensing their capabilities, are uh, providing multiple capabilities within a platform that makes it easy for companies for cybersecurity operations to acquire new capabilities. And so that's mostly, a sort of a bureaucratic approach. But on the flip side, we see that new entrants are focusing on capabilities like AI-driven threat detection and adaptive protection. So, on the one hand, you'll see uh, market participants utilizing their existing reach into the market to do innovative things with respect to licensing. And you'll see new entrants challenging that with new capabilities. So it's a very vibrant market. From the standpoint of IDC, this is a really exciting place to be. From the standpoint of somebody who's trying to make a decision on what tools to use, it can be a very daunting experience. And so the good and the bad is there are lots of really interesting things out there. The bad news is sometimes it can be a little bit hard to decide which things to get. Let's advance here. So what does the market look like? We just recently did a market share study. And so you can see here that a good third of the market share uh, is attributable to new entrants. And these are participants in the market whose share is less than about 3%. And there are lots of them. So, whereas Some of the bigger names in this market, Microsoft, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, and so forth, are names that are recognized within cybersecurity. More frequently, there are new entrants whose names are not recognized, but they contribute to the background noise, especially when you have competing value propositions that all kind of sound the same. So from 23 to 24, which is the last time we did this, collected the data for the market share, the market grew by about 17.5%, 17.6%. The major market participants uh, gained a little bit, whereas the rest of the market declined slightly. And that's kind of rational when you think about it. We're in an age where a lot of the technology uptake is being driven by the upgrade of computer equipment, inventory turnover. And so you'd expect to see a little bit of that. But what we also see is that the rate of growth is slowing down a little bit. From 2022 to 2023, we saw 21.4% growth in the market, which was basically a post-COVID kind of recovery where people really weren't spending and now they're spending a lot. We expect the rate of growth to continue to decline a little bit through 2029, but as I indicated, the CAGR is still at 11%, so that's substantial growth in the market. The desire on the part of the market to protect the endpoint is acute, and it will remain that way for a while. So how does that break down in terms of geographical areas? Well, the Americas still have a little bit more than half of the market share. EMEA has about a third, and Asia Pac has about an eighth. Uh, Overall, as I indicated, the market's growing by 17.6%. But the question is, why are the Americas growing at the rate they are? Why wouldn't it be EMEA, for example? Well, the reason is that the Americas are just now kind of discovering the notion of data security. We're also starting to see the public policy shifting in the direction of demanding better data security. And to a certain extent, EMEA has already been there. And they've already thought in terms of GDPR and protecting personal data and the consequences of not doing it well. That's something that the Americas are discovering, and we expect that to continue for a while. But overall, we believe that the market will grow. We also are keeping our eye on Asia Pac because, shifting supply chains and so forth will uh, basically demand that certain countries that weren't all that interested in security in the future will be. So, how mature is the market? In other words, do people really believe the gospel of endpoint security, or is there still room for growth there? Well, if you're a vendor, the good news is that there is room for growth. And what we're seeing is that the overall maturity of the market is kind of tilted towards entry-level capabilities, in some cases, very basic capabilities. And you can see from this chart how it kind of breaks down. Right now, I would say that in terms of technology, the US is probably showing the most maturity in terms of technology, but there's definitely room for growth across the geographies, especially when you look at the way that basic capabilities are mapping out to the various geos. So there's a lot of room for growth here. The growth coming in the form of better endpoint protection, more can't even talk, sophisticated capabilities. And so we expect in IDC, we expect to see the technological maturity, the application of endpoint to increase over time. So what are some of the key trends in endpoint protection? I almost hate to say it because it's the latest shiny thing. But AI is a thing in endpoint. When we ran a survey, I think it was the end of last year, we discovered that given a choice between a solution that says it has AI and one that says it doesn't, uh, about 92% of buyers of endpoint security say they would go with the one that has an AI capability. But it's not just any AI capability. When we ask, where do you want to see it? Is it on the user interface? Is it on detection? Is it on response? It turned out that the number one capability where buyers want to see AI applied is on detection, applying artificial intelligence to finding the threat in the first place. So it's kind of interesting that much of the activity in AI in the endpoint space has been devoted to producing better UIs. And of course, that's a good thing to do because, as we all know, there's a labor shortage in security, and a really good user interface helps elevate the capabilities of lower level technicians to somewhat higher than that. So it's a way of leveraging technology to compensate for labor. Second thing is platformization. And whenever I say this, people get kind of tense because they're saying, "Oh, you're talking about, a vendor with a platform that does everything. What about point solutions that might be better?" Well, actually, when we say platformization, we're not necessarily talking about an offering from a vendor. What we are talking about is the ability of various solutions to work together. Now that can be either as integrating one solution with another through APIs, or it can be, once again, it can be a vendor that offers a platform that has everything in it. I won't belabor the point, but there are virtues on both sides. Going with point solutions that integrate give you the virtue of the latest thing, but may complicate things like updating your solutions. Whereas with a platform, updating your capabilities may be fairly straightforward, but at the same time, you may not be market leading, you may be market following. Those are all considerations that you have to take into account. But the end result for both sides of the equation is that at some point, highly integrated solution sets are the way we want to go. And that's strictly because the value proposition associated with cybersecurity is moving up the stack. At some point, integration of all these telemetric sources and all of these detection capabilities needs to come together. Uh, just because we need to have pervasive cybersecurity that responds to threats at every level. And finally, focus on SMBs. It's a truism that most of the new business in the U.S. market, for example, is coming from small, medium-sized businesses, not enterprises. So the SMB space is growing at a ferocious rate. Smaller companies are responsible for most of the new hiring, especially in the tech professions. And if you think about it, a small, medium-sized business has the same exact cybersecurity considerations or concerns that an enterprise does, but has fewer people to address those concerns. And so what we're seeing is that the SMB needs are driving vendors to come up with easier to use solutions that don't require huge SOCs to implement. In some cases, delivering cybersecurity solutions that are cloud-based and basically subscriber-based, so that a small, medium-sized business doesn't necessarily have to have a huge cybersecurity organization. They can simply pay as they go and obtain security as a service. But in any case, we see the dynamic here pushing vendors to provide solutions that are much easier to use, much easier to update, and are much more user-friendly than in previous generations of solution, simply because the expanding market that we all want to address, the SMB space, is the one where we're going to see the most growth. So, speaking about endpoint solutions, who's making the decision to buy these things? It's one of the concerns that we have at IDC about whether or not we're making the right case to the right decision makers. And if you take a look here, you'll see that influencers span the organization. In the enterprise, especially, you'll see endpoint on cybersecurity solutions coming from uh, as diverse organizations as finance, as HR, as the business units, even the C-suite. But where is the buy decision being made? Well, it's being made at the C-suite. Because quite frequently, if we're adopting a brand new endpoint solution, the solution is not coming without costs. And there are the direct costs of licensing, but there are also the overhead costs associated with training and operations and business processes that need to be adjusted. So what we're seeing is that whereas the people on the operational level in cybersecurity are defining the capabilities that are needed, it's the business-oriented people at the top that are making those buy decisions. The implication for all of us is that vendors need to do a really good job of explaining not only how they improve cybersecurity, but also how they improve the business. So if you're a CISO and you're going in for funding, you need to be able to say, buy this solution because it will improve our resiliency, cybersecurity resiliency, but at the same time, it'll help us produce more widgets, or it'll help us make more revenue, or it'll help us reduce costs overall. Um, that's a message that's increasingly going to be important. Increasingly, it's going to be a message that we need to make. And by the way, I really love this slide, based on a lot of data, and I just get a kick out of it. Okay, so what are some of the impacts of adjacent technologies, adjacent threat vectors on endpoint security? Well, we mentioned it before, but mobility is a big one. Uh, Mobile devices kind of came into their own during COVID, where businesses discovered that the appropriate mobile device, you could tap an employee that basically could be anywhere. And so they became part of the ecosystem of the computing environment, the data environment in the enterprise. The problem with it is, though, that mobile devices typically are not just mobile devices. Uh, they're typically devices that carry lots of applications on them in kind of a native mode. And every one of those applications becomes a point of potential compromise to the enterprise. So connecting a cell phone to the network, for example, brings potentially hundreds of applications, each one of which might pose a threat. So mobility has compromised the endpoint to a very large extent. And our challenge is how do we secure an environment that has potential for great compromise? And it complicates our job of even understanding what the endpoint is to a large extent. The second thing, which is allied with the first thing, is bring your own device. We discovered in our last survey that only about 30% of enterprises prohibit the use of BYOD. Every other enterprise, to some extent, allows it. And if you're bringing your own device, once again, you're bringing your personal ecosystem of computing, of connections, of social networking. All of those things are being brought into the enterprise, complicating the job of protecting that endpoint. And then finally, identity-centric security. Uh, Even if you think you know what the device is, you may not know the person using that device. And so identity is becoming a big thing in the endpoint. And especially when you move up the cybersecurity stack, when you get to XDR, for example, identity is one of the primary sources of telemetry that allows you to detect threats. But it's becoming a thing in endpoint as well. Do we know who it is that's using the device? Can we identify that person based upon usage, based upon the things that they're supposed to be using? Um, it's complicating things tremendously, but at the same time, it's a potential source of real security if we can get our hands around it. So that brings us to recommendations for decision makers. And most of this looks like, was it apple pie and motherhood? In any case, it looks like fairly generic stuff, but it's really important. Like I said, seek integrated solutions. The more your endpoint solutions connect to other things, the more utility you obtain from them, the better your response is going to be. Prioritize usability. If you've got tools that are really, really hard to use, that translates directly into costs. It translates into labor utilization. Look for solutions that provide a good user experience. Leverage AI-driven capabilities. Well, once again, this gets back to prioritizing usability. If AI gives you a better interface, that's something to look at. If it gives you a better detection capability, that's even better. Secure the mobile edge. It's easy to say, it's hard to do. The mobility confers lots of opportunity for the business to generate revenue, but it also expands the threat. At the very least, it needs to be part of your security planning. Manage your BYOD risks. Starts with policy. When can you use your own devices? How much can you use? Are there requirements for your device to carry cybersecurity solutions from the enterprise? Those are all considerations that you need to take into account. Balance cost and complexity. Anything that's complex to use is also costly. And when we run surveys, the two primary considerations for people who are making the buy decision for technology are: is it complex? Can we install the thing? Can we make it work? What happens if it breaks? What does our support look like? Is it easy to use or hard to use? And then secondly, is it expensive? Can we afford it? Do we get as much benefit as we need to from what we're paying? And that gets back into, can we make a business case for it? And finally, embrace future proofing. If you're not looking at the future and future needs and how your cybersecurity needs are going to evolve in response to the threat, you really need to do that. It requires a strategic plan. We recommend finding a few vendors that are really on top of this sort of thing, and SentinelOne being one of those. And have them help you come up with a strategic plan that ensures that whatever you're putting in today will be usable in the future. And finally, we come back to the caboose, and I'll just read it. The endpoint protection market is evolving rapidly, driven by technological advancements, mobility threats, and the increasing complexity of cyber threats. Decision makers must adopt a strategic approach focusing on integration, AI capabilities, and mobile security to ensure comprehensive protection and business continuity. By aligning endpoint security investments and organizational goals, businesses can enhance resilience while optimizing operational efficiency. And, if you haven't chiseled this into stone, put it on the wall, this is essentially how you need to look at endpoint protection, cybersecurity generally, and, partner with good vendors to help you get there.